Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to the consolidated study of the Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1. And this is the first class. Jai. So as always, we're going to start with some kirtan. Best way to start. Just turn on the musician's audio.
Okay. Hi, sweet souls. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so happy to be back together 1 week. Felt like a lifetime. And welcome to those that are just joining this Shastra class. So let's start with just a deep breath in through the nose. Sip it in, sip it in, sip it in. Open your mouth, exhale. Clear it out, clear it out, clear it out. Let's do 2 more like that, just to clear whatever came before your day, whatever you're navigating. Your breath in, sip it in. Big sigh out. One more. And we'll start with our opening prayers, this invocation, honoring of all of our teachers who have gifted us the torchlight of knowledge and removed the darkness of ignorance, meaning not knowing truth, absolute truth. With such gratitude for gifting us this transcendental knowledge and this transcendental sound vibration of kirtan, of shastra, and doing so in sangha. Deep breath in. Om Jnana-Timirandasya Jnananjana-Shalakaya Chakshurunattamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Vanchakotatubhyascha Kripasindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, From Bhaktial Sangha and beyond, Ki. Shastra Study Group, Ki. Hari Hari Bol.
Om Jnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vancha Kalpatarupyascha Kripasantuye Cha Patitanam Bhavanepyo Vaishnavepyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. What a nice turnout for this first class of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Great to be with all of you in person, live, on Zoom, and those listen to the recording on YouTube. Hare Krishna. So, as many of you know, because many of you have been with this container as we've moved through different books, we've studied a lot of texts, and we're coming now to the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Bhagavatam is such an important text. It's considered to be as we're going to hear very soon, in the first couple of verses of the Bhagavatam itself, it's expressed to be the ripened fruit of the entire tree of the Vedic presentation. So it's like, you have a tree, and the tree gathers nutrients and water, and it creates leaves and twigs, and all the condensed, concentrated energy of the tree comes out in the fruit. And the fruit is just there, and you just get to taste it. And this Bhagavatam is considered to be the ripened fruit, the full expression of the Vedas. It's the kind of the postgraduate study of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a book that we study together. It's a book that we're going to continue to read. It's a very, very important book. And the Bhagavatam kind of picks up where the Bhagavad Gita ends. As many of you might remember, Bhagavad Gita ends with Krishna having expressed to Arjuna in so many different ways how they're connected, and how Arjuna's difficulty was rooted in forgetting his relationship with Krishna. The basic 5 topics of Bhagavad Gita are the soul, the Lord or source, creator, time, and karma, and the material universe. And so having established all of that, basically having established, okay, so we're not our bodies. We're not the material minds. These are functions of our experience here in the material world. We have this material aspect to our existence, but we're actually conscious spiritual units, right? Little units of consciousness connected to the source. And there is source, and it has different names, including Krishna. And so what does that mean? And the Bhagavatam then is picking up where that leaves off. Okay, so what does it look like when the soul is connecting to its source in devotion? And so it's 18,000 verses over 12 cantos, and it's quite an extensive science. It focuses on each one of these 5 topics. What does the soul look like in their conditioned state? What do they look like in their fully liberated state in relationship to the divine? What are different incarnations or avatars of the Lord? What are his qualities? What are his energies? What is his feminine aspect? What is she like? The material universe. The 2nd and 3rd cantos particularly is described very systematically what the physical and metaphysical aspects of the universe are, how they're developed, in what order, from what time. So it's very detailed, and we're going to be starting from the 1st canto. I'm not sure if we'll make a systematic study of every canto, but the 1st canto is quite complete in itself, actually. And the presentation of the Bhagavatam that's given in the 2nd canto, chapter 10, the 10 subjects of Bhagavatam are given. And in there our acharyas, the commentators, have described that these first 2 cantos, they're like the feet of the Lord. They're like the lotus feet. And as you're looking at the Lord from the bottom up, you get eventually to his smiling face, right? Which is the 10th canto. And these first 2 cantos, they really establish a lot of fundamental knowledge. And they also have, especially the 1st canto, a lot of Krishna directly. He's there with Arjuna. Later in this canto, he's there with his great devotee, Narada Muni. Some of you have studied that chapter with me, the 5th chapter. We're going to get to it. So this is a little bit of an overview of the Bhagavatam. We're going to jump right in. This is kind of like a condensed presentation. We're not going to be reading word for word, verse for verse. As you can imagine, if there's 18,000 verses and we're reading the first canto out of 12, can we pass that first canto over? This is what she looks like. Some of you have this in your hands. Quite extensive. We're not going to read every verse, but I've read the first canto something like 5 times, and I've studied it. And some of you are going to will be getting this. This is the first part of the first canto. It's the only part of the Bhagavatam that was printed separately. It's just like the first 8 chapters. This is much more manageable.
So the rest you'll read online.
The rest you can read online. So yeah, I've studied this Bhagavatam myself quite extensively before I was a monk, when I was a monk, afterwards. I've read it, the first canto probably 5 or 6 times. So I'm going to be leading you through it. And I'm also drawing from a nice study guide, which I'll recommend if anybody really wants to get deeper into it. It's not necessary. I think the whole point is to really read the whole first canto, the whole Bhagavatam. But if you want to have a study guide, I can send a link in the chat, in the WhatsApp. Here. Yeah, I'll link it in the chat right now. It's called the Bhagavad Subodhini. It's by some great devotees in India. Where's this chat function? Here we go. I've read this book as well, and I've used it in my classes. It's got a lot of flowcharts. It kind of summarizes the knowledge of the first canto. Again, don't feel like you need it. You don't. But I can also send you an electronic copy if you're really interested. But if you want to support them, you can also buy this study guide. So before we jump in, I will read a little bit of what one of our predecessor acharyas has written about the Bhagavatam. Actually, all of our previous acharyas, the 6 Goswamis especially, they had great reverence for this book, the Srimad Bhagavatam. One verse out of several that Srila Sanatana Goswami wrote about the Bhagavatam is as follows. Madekabanto matsangyan madguru manmahatana mannistarika madbhagya madananda namostute. O Srimad Bhagavatam, O my only friend. O companion, O my teacher, O my great wealth, O my deliverer, O my good fortune, O my source of bliss, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. And Srila Prabhupada, who translated and commented on the Bhagavatam, whose, of course, translation we're reading, he actually translated and commented on the Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1 while he was in India, before he came to the West. And he began publication and distribution of it as much as possible. He would travel to Delhi from Vrindavan, where he was living, which is not an easy trek, as many of you know. And then he would print Bhagavatams and try to distribute them there. And when he came to the West, knowing basically nobody and having no money, the only real possession he brought with him was a chest, kind of like a packaged chest full of Bhagavatams, the first canto. And he had a little poster he was distributing about the Bhagavatam, and it promised that it was going to be a full set, although he'd only finished the first canto. So he was very ambitious and very, very dedicated. An old man of over 70 years old who had 2 heart attacks on the way over, carrying, has his only possession, several chests of this volume. So it's something that he considered central to his mission to his spiritual master. Something he was asked to do is translate these books, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam. And with all that in mind, we'll jump into Srila Prabhupada's preface. So I'll be reading parts of the preface and parts of purports throughout, so I won't be reading like every word, but feel free to follow along. And as an invocation, I'll recite the invocation that we always recite for the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is actually derived from the first verse we'll get to in a second. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, so from the preface, Srila Prabhupada writes, and he's writing to us from the early 60s from India. We must know the present need of human society. The need is felt by great thinkers to make this a successful ideology. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need in human society. It begins with an aphorism of Vedanta philosophy, Janmadi Yasiyataha, to establish the ideal of a common cause. Human society at the present moment is not in the darkness of oblivion. It has made rapid progress in the fields of material comforts, education, and economic development throughout the entire world. But there is a pinprick somewhere in the social body at large, and therefore there are large-scale quarrels even over less important issues. There is need of a clue as to how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, and prosperity with a common cause. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need, for it is a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. Srimad Bhagavatam is a transcendental science, not only for knowing the ultimate source of everything, but also for knowing our relationship with Him and our duty toward perfection of the human society on the basis of this perfect knowledge. It is powerful reading matter in the Sanskrit language and is now rendered into English elaborately, so that simply by careful reading one will know God perfectly well. Srila Prabhupada ends this preface by being very humble. He speaks, he says, actually, I must admit my frailties in presenting Srimad Bhagavatam, but still I'm hopeful of its good reception by the thinkers and leaders of society on the strength of the following verse. This is from the Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 11. The verse says, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, and pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a transcendental creation meant for bringing about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literature, even though irregularly composed, is heard, sung, and accepted by purified persons who are thoroughly honest. So this purpose Srila Prabhupada has, he's actually quoting it, he's deriving from the Bhagavatam, which is to, quote, bring about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization. Quite radical, actually. He's very much, as he said, aiming to re-spiritualize human society. Note that he's using the term re-spiritualize because the idea is that we actually have a spiritual essence. We are spiritual beings. And yet, Prabhupada's claim is that in this day and age, that is by and large forgotten or obscured by sectarian considerations. I think it's a pretty fair assessment. So moving into the introduction, did you want to say something?
I'm wondering for those that are newer to the literature, if you could just speak to briefly why it's always he and why you change that word. Interested.
Oh yeah, just as a linguistic thing. So you may see, if you're reading along, you may see that Srila Prabhupada is using the kind of, at this point, antiquated, but until recently, long-held convention in English of using he or him to refer to the gender neutral any human being. So that's kind of fallen out of favor in the last decade, yeah, last 5-10 years. And so I sometimes will, when I'm reading along, just translate it as them, because I've read all these sentences before. Unless he's specifically talking about, for example, Krishna or any other definite masculine person, I don't want there to be a sense that he's only speaking to males, because he's not. And we don't really use that convention anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
But they did for a long time, and Prabhupada in the 60s was drawing on that. Yeah. And yeah, in general, if there's any questions or comments or reflections throughout, I will be stopping at several points to take reflections, but you can also just raise your hands and put something in chat. I'll see it or you'll see it and let me know. So moving to the introduction, Prabhupada begins this introduction by talking about how there is this idea of God and also the idea of the absolute truth. And they're not exactly the same thing. He says, the Srimad Bhagavatam hits on the target of the absolute truth. The conception of God indicates the controller, whereas the conception of the absolute truth indicates the summum bonum. It's a Latin term meaning the highest good, the complete source, or the ultimate source of all energies. There is no difference of opinion about the personal feature of God as the controller, because the controller cannot be impersonal. Of course, modern government, especially democratic government, is impersonal to some extent, but ultimately the chief executive head is a person. And the impersonal feature of government is subordinate to the personal feature. So Prabhupada is speaking here about how the idea of God is the idea that somebody's in control, right? And Bhagavatam talks about that. But it even goes beyond the idea of God. The idea of the supreme truth, the absolute truth, is that from which everything emanates. So that means that that source, that is also the controller, from which the material universe also comes, to which we are also related, you know? And so this Bhagavatam first verse actually begins by talking about the absolute truth, and not just you could say the person who is in charge, the supreme controller. It'll get to that. And in continuing his introduction, Srila Prabhupada very quickly moves into this idea. He says, it is imperative that one learn the Srimad Bhagavatam from the person Bhagavatam. The person Bhagavatam is one whose very life is Srimad Bhagavatam in practice. And this idea is there in the Bhagavatam as well, that we're not just learning a dry science. It's not just you can get it from a book. This is very personal, and as such, it's properly learned through the books, but also through people and through their lives and through interacting with them. And because of that, Srila Prabhupada actually spends the bulk of this introduction giving us a biography of Lord Chaitanya, right? As many of you know, you've seen our deity here, Lord Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or Lord Chaitanya, also known as Gauranga, is an incarnation. It's actually Krishna himself, who appeared 500 years ago for the purpose of spreading bhakti, redistributing it, because kirtan was neglected. The spiritual science was kind of kept in the hands only of brahmanas, and even then not necessarily properly understood. So he re-spiritualized society in India at large by breaking down the barriers in the caste system, breaking down gender, political, social barriers, presenting the spiritual science of the Vedas, which culminates in bhakti, devotion, devotional yoga, connecting through devotion, and having that be accessible to all persons. Because according to all these books, including the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is the birthright of every living entity, not just even humans. So Lord Chaitanya's life is very interesting and very beautiful, because in his pastimes, he demonstrated what it was like to be apparently disinterested in bhakti, and then very interested in bhakti when he met his spiritual master, fell in love with kirtan, fell in love with chanting Krishna's names. And if I recall correctly, this whole introduction is about 40 pages in your books. So we're not going to read from it, but I'm going to just kind of like mention that this is very beautiful, very powerful reading, especially for those who want to develop a relationship more with Lord Chaitanya. This is probably the most kind of condensed presentation of Lord Chaitanya's entire life. It's like a mini biography here in 40 pages. And it's beautiful. Prabhupada calls it the short sketch on the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam. He calls him the great apostle of love of God and the father of the congregational chanting of the holy name of the Lord. So I'm actually going to, and I hate to do it, but I'm going to not read from this section right now with my obeisances to Lord Chaitanya. His pastimes are very important, and I'll just summarize them by saying that he demonstrated the practical effect of chanting, the practical effect of the power of the holy name of Krishna. He demonstrated that personally himself, and he empowered others, especially the six Goswamis, to take up that practice themselves and also to write books substantiating that this is actually, drawing on all the literature of the Vedas, showing how this is actually what this spiritual tradition has been talking about for thousands of years, that it culminates in personally taking shelter of the source. And that chanting is the most practical way to do that, especially in this age, when we don't have the wherewithal, the long lifespans, the training, the sense control to sit on a mountaintop and meditate for hundreds and hundreds of years, which was what was necessary in previous yugas. And so he demonstrated this chanting process. And his followers substantiated that with writing and unearthing the places of pastimes of Krishna himself as they happened 5,000 years ago. You can see now many beautiful places of pilgrimage in India have been unearthed and developed by these followers of Lord Chaitanya, and to share the chanting process. So that's a very quick summary of Lord Chaitanya's mission. And for more, I strongly recommend you read it. We're not going to read it right now. But I will read the only thing that Lord Chaitanya wrote down, which is what's called the Shikshashtaka, 8 verses of instruction. And in those 8 verses, he summarizes the entire spiritual science. He himself didn't write really anything else practically after he became a full-fledged, pure lover of devotee of God. His followers wrote on his instruction, but this is the only thing he wrote, so it's very beautiful. And so I'll read here from the end of the introduction, the translation to the Shikshashtaka. Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana. Sankirtana means the congregational chanting, Krishna's names, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names, like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you've invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by chanting your holy names. But I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda, Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up? And when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I'm considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I'm feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he shall remain so, even if he handles me roughly in his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. So that's the Shikshashtaka. Entire books have been written just about it. It's a very deep presentation of the evolving psychology of somebody who's falling in love with the Supreme Person. And within it is also a great deal about the science of chanting. So moving on to the actual text of the Bhagavatam. But before we do, we'll pause now for reflections, anything you heard that stood out from what you have heard so far, questions, comments, or just expressions of excitement, whatever you're feeling as you jump into this Bhagavatam.
I love how you shared how the first 2 cantos are spoken of, like the feet of Krishna,
Yeah.
being the supreme, and when we work our way up to the 10th canto, it's his smile.
Yeah, a smiling face.
Beautiful.
Laura.
So, do I understand correctly that you said the Shikshashtaka is the only thing that Lord Chaitanya wrote? Not ever, right? Or was it the only thing he wrote?
Well, in his youth, he was a great scholar and a teacher of grammar, the Sanskrit language, and other things. And he taught. And so he may have written things then, but nothing survived. After he met his spiritual teacher and began his chanting, falling in love with Krishna because of it, he himself, although quite fluent in all the spiritual texts and extremely well read, did not write anything else except for this. He did empower his followers to write extensively and give commentaries on existing books. And so primarily the six Goswamis, his direct followers, the first generation after him, they wrote a great deal, especially Rupa, Sanatan, and Jiva Goswami, the youngest of the Goswamis. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of thousands of verses. Yeah, so that's all there, but Lord Chaitanya himself only wrote what I just read to you. It was in Sanskrit, of course, but that's Prabhupada's translation. Good question. So it's an interesting kind of apparent duality where it's the spiritual science is it's so natural and heartfelt that it can be expressed in a poem only 8 stanzas long. And at the same time, it's substantiated with the writings and teachings of his followers, which draw on and connect like a tapestry the existing Vedic literatures. It is at once both very intellectual, very analytical, and at the same time extremely simple and heartfelt. So that's there in our movement. It really brings the heart and the head together.
Marriage of apparent contradictions.
Yeah. Any more reflections or questions or comments before we jump in to the text? Great to see all of you, by the way. Hare Krishna. Okay. So this first chapter is called Questions by the Sages. And I'll read the first verse in Sanskrit because it's very beautiful. And I'm going to read as much as I can of these first 3 verses. They're quite extensive, the commentaries, but they're very important. They lay the groundwork for the whole Bhagavatam. And then I'll give you an overview of the whole chapter. And it is basically about several questions that are asked that establish the whole kind of direction of this text, because it's really answering those questions. That is the 18,000 verses that makes the text what it is. If we don't get through all of this first chapter today, that's kind of likely. We'll finish it next week. This is a bigger chapter. We're going to probably, some of these bigger chapters will take 2 classes to do. So, text 1. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadiyasya Tvanvayaditartashtartishva Pignyasvarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Mohyanti Yatsuraya Tejo Vari Mridangita Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrusha Tamasvena Siddhani Rastakuvakang Satyam Parang Dhimahi. Translation: O my Lord, O Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire, or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the 3 modes of nature, appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Can you take a look at these first? How long are the purports, the first 3 verses in pages?
One's like 6.5 pages.
And what are how long are the other ones?
X2 is 2.5 pages. X3 is 1, 2, 3.5.
Okay, so like 11
The
pages?
first verse is the longest.
Yeah. All right. I won't read every word then. So Srila Prabhupada is talking here about how this is directly speaking to Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The Aya ending means he's speaking directly to Krishna. It's a very formal kind of prayer instruction here. Vyasadeva, who wrote this verse, who wrote this text, is asserting herein that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all others are his direct or indirect plenary portions or portions of the plenary portions. That's something that's going to come up in the 3rd chapter. That Krishna is the source of all other incarnations, actually, even all other avatars. This is a word that's come into the English language. An avatara means that which crosses over. Ava actually means like downward, from the spiritual realm to the material, that which crosses over from the up to the down. Krishna is the source of all avatars. That's established in the 3rd chapter. And so Vyasadeva, the compiler of these Vedas, he's actually offering his obeisances to Krishna directly. Prabhupada continues, in Bhagavad Gita, in many places, the Lord asserts himself to be the original personality of Godhead. And this is confirmed by Arjuna and also by great sages like Narada, Vyasa, and many others. It is also stated that out of the innumerable names of the Lord, the name of Krishna is the principal one. Vasudeva indicates the plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. Vasudeva, or Lord Sri Krishna, is the cause of all causes. Everything that exists emanates from the Lord. How this is so is explained in later chapters of this work. This work is described by Lord Chaitanya as the spotless Purana, because it contains the transcendental narration of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The history of the Srimad Bhagavatam is also very glorious. It was compiled by Sri Vyasadeva after he had attained maturity in transcendental knowledge. He wrote this under the instructions of Sri Narada, his spiritual master. Vyasadeva compiled all Vedic literatures containing the 4 divisions of the Vedas, the Vedanta Sutras, or the Brahma Sutras, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, and so on. But nevertheless, he was not satisfied. His dissatisfaction was observed by his spiritual master, and thus Narada advised him to write on the transcendental activities of Lord Sri Krishna. These transcendental activities are described specifically in the 10th canto of this work, but in order to reach to the very substance, one must proceed gradually by developing knowledge of the categories. So this pastime of Vyasadeva actually being dissatisfied, despite actually writing and compiling the Vedas, is in this 1st canto. We're going to get to it. It's chapter 4 and 5, where he, although he is in meditation, he's not satisfied with his own service of compiling even the Mahabharata and the Puranas and Vedas. And Narada Muni basically tells him, you need to be more direct. You need to help people actually understand their connection to the personal source, not just give them license to become lost in the rituals. So, it is natural that a philosophical mind wants to know about the origin of creation. At night they see the stars in the sky and they naturally speculate about their inhabitants. Such inquiries are natural for man, because man has a developed consciousness which is higher than that of the animals. The author of Srimad Bhagavatam gives a direct answer to such inquiries. He says that the Lord Sri Krishna is the origin of all creations. He is not only the creator of the universe, but the destroyer as well. Time is, as was touched on in Bhagavad Gita, time is actually a cyclical thing. It's not a linear thing that has one beginning and then just goes on forever or ends or something. The material manifestation is constantly being manifested and unmanifested on cycles of billions of years, trillions of years. That those timescales are touched at in this canto and more in the 2nd and 3rd cantos.
Reincarnation. So.
Yeah, reincarnation is there as well. The manifested cosmic nature is created at a certain period by the will of the Lord. It is maintained for some time, and then it is annihilated by his will. Therefore, the supreme will is behind all cosmic activities. Of course, there are atheists of various categories who do not believe in a creator, but that is due to a poor fund of knowledge. The modern scientist, for example, has created space satellites, and by some arrangement or other, these satellites are thrown into outer space to fly for some time, at the control of the scientist who is far away. Similarly, all the universes with innumerable stars and planets are controlled by the intelligence of the personality of Godhead. Recently, I found out that some friends of mine, who I knew when I was a monk, have finished a book that I knew they were working on. I actually have it bookmarked here. I haven't bought a copy of it yet, but it talks about how it's called The Big Bang and the Sages. Modern science catches up with the ancient Puranas. It's talking about how the time scales and ideas of a universe that we're having now because of modern science they're only like ideas we've had in the last 50 years. They actually correspond quite closely with what the Bhagavatam and other Puranas are talking about. It's actually statistically almost impossible that it would happen by chance, and yet here we are. So if you have that kind of mind and you really want to know more about that, I can send you the link for that book. But for now, Prabhupada will continue on the basis of this idea that actually everything was being emanated from a supreme person. The Big Bang is actually an effect of a Big Banger. There's none other than an avatar of an avatar of an avatar of Krishna. We'll get to that. Chapter 3. In the Vedic literatures, it is said the absolute truth personality of Godhead is the chief amongst all living personalities. Srimad Bhagavatam is a narration of the Swarupa, the personal form of the Lord, manifested by his internal potency. And this potency is distinguished from the external potency, which has manifested the cosmic world, which is within our experience. Srila Vyasadeva makes a clear distinction between the two in this verse. Srila Vyasadeva says herein that the manifested internal potency is real, whereas the external manifested energy, in the form of material existence, is only temporary and illusory, like the mirage in the desert. In the material sky, everything is relative truth. That is to say, one truth depends on something else. This cosmic creation results from interaction of the three modes of nature, and the temporary manifestations are so created as to present an illusion of reality to the bewildered mind of the conditioned soul. So, a little bit of clarification here. Prabhupada is going to elaborate on this point, and I'll just summarize for him. It's not that the material world is presented as being unreal, that it doesn't actually exist. What's actually being presented is that the world is like a dream. When you dream, you have an experience of the dream world. But it's actually like a temporary thing because you stop dreaming at some point and you come back to your actual life. So the material world presents a face like it's very, very real. And the things that are happening are like permanently affecting everything. But actually it's always coming and going, right? Mm-hmm. So the meaning ascribed to it is actually quite false. So one's material experience is a real experience. What you're experiencing is real experience. But the idea that the material world is all there is actually not correct. That's an illusion. That's what's being talked about here. Prabhupada gives this example. A chemist can manufacture water in the chemical laboratory by mixing hydrogen and oxygen, but in reality, the living entity works in the laboratory under the direction of the Supreme Lord, and the materials with which they work are also supplied by the Lord. The Lord knows everything directly and indirectly, and he is cognizant of all minute details, and he is fully independent. He is compared to a mine of gold, and the cosmic creations in so many different forms are compared to objects made from the gold, such as gold rings, necklaces, and so on. The gold ring and the gold necklace are qualitatively one with the gold in the mine, but quantitatively the gold in the mine is different. Therefore, the absolute truth is simultaneously one and different. Nothing is absolutely equal with the absolute truth. But at the same time, nothing is independent of the absolute truth. Does that make sense? This is a restatement of the idea of what in Sanskrit we call as achintya bheda bheda tattva, the idea that everything is simultaneously one with, but also different from the source. It's one with because everything is coming from that same Lord, that same source, right? It's all his energy. And yet it's different from because just like we can say a ray of the sun, comes through your window, like, oh, the sun is up. There's the sun, right? We can't say that ray of the sun is something different from the sun. It's the sun. And yet, it's not the whole sun. If the whole sun came in through your window, you'd be burned to a crisp. But it's the sun. It's a manifestation of his energy. So this world is a manifestation of his external energy. We are a manifestation of his internal energy because we're actually conscious living entities. We're of a different category than the external energy. Right? We don't have a beginning or an end. We actually are conscious living entities. But still, we're an energy of that source. And he is that same source of matter, source of consciousness. He is all that, and he is his own personality as well. In the Shruti mantra, it is stated that the absolute whole, or Brahman, is the ultimate source of everything. Everything emanates from him and everything is maintained by him. At the end, everything enters into him. That is the law of nature. Herein, the ultimate source is explained. It is stated in this shloka, or verse, that Brahma was taught Vedic knowledge by the personality of Godhead. One may argue that Brahma, being the original living being, could not be inspired because there was no other being living at that time. However, it is stated that the Supreme Lord inspired the secondary creator, Brahma, in order that Brahma could carry out his creative functions. So the supreme intelligence behind all creations is the absolute truth, absolute Godhead, Sri Krishna. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, it is certain that they will be bewildered. When an intelligent person surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna and knows completely that Krishna is the cause of all causes, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, then such an intelligent person becomes a Mahatma, a great soul. But such a great soul is rarely seen. So this is a reference to the process of actually understanding the absolute truth is not one of conquering them by one's own intelligence. It involves actually taking the process that's offered. We can't actually know the absolute truth under our own power. But if there is such a thing as an absolute truth, if they wish to reveal themselves, then they can be known that way, right? Otherwise, our tiny little puppy brains, our little 20/20 vision eyes, what can they understand? We can only understand what is bestowed on us. So therefore, there's this necessity, as Prabhupada is pointing out, necessity of surrender. Prabhupada is also proving here that the Bhagavatam is an ancient text based on references that are found to it in other texts. The Srimad Bhagavatam will gradually elevate the unbiased reader to the highest perfectional stage of transcendence. It will enable them to transcend the three modes of material activities: fruitive actions, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities as inculcated in Dharmic and Vedic verses. Okay, second verse. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Sometimes it's a nice little kind of like nutshell presentation of what this book is. It's reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within their heart. So Prabhupada's commentary. Religion includes four primary subjects, namely pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. Indeed, human life begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating are the four principles of animal life. These are common both to animals and human beings. But religion is the extra function of the human being. Therefore, in human societies, there is some form of religion which aims at self-realization and which makes reference to man's eternal relationship with God. In the lower stages of human civilization, there's always competition to lord it over the material nature, or in other words, there is a continuous rivalry to satisfy the senses. Driven by such consciousness, man, humanity, turns to religion. They thus perform pious activities or religious functions in order to gain something material. But if such material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so-called religion is neglected. This is the situation in modern civilization. Man is thriving economically, so at present they are not very interested in religion. Churches, mosques, or temples are now practically vacant. Men are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than in religious places which were erected by their forefathers. This practically proves that religion is performed for some economic gains. Economic gains are needed for sense gratification. When one is baffled in the pursuit of sense gratification, they take to salvation and try to become one with the Supreme Lord. Consequently, all these states are simply different types of sense gratification. So this verse begins by saying Dharma prochita kaitava. This Bhagavatam is rejecting dharma or religion or spiritual activity which is materially motivated. Right? It's not about that. This kind of transactional religiosity, transactional so-called spirituality. This is not what the Bhagavatam is about. You don't read this book because you want to like please God and make a lot of money, right? That kind of thing. It's not what this is about. Prabhupada's going to elaborate. He says here, in the Vedas, the above mentioned 4 activities are prescribed in a regulative way so that there will not be any undue competition for sense gratification. But Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental to all these sense gratificatory activities. It is purely transcendental literature which can be understood only by the pure devotees of the Lord who are transcendental to competitive sense gratification. In the material world, there is keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community and community, nation and nation. But the devotees of the Lord rise above such competitions. Right? Sometimes we see that persons who are very invested in a religious tradition are also very invested in such kinds of competitions. Therefore, it's to be understood that that expression of religion is still within the modes of nature. It's still very much about what Prabhupada is saying this verse is rejecting. That is not what the Bhagavatam is about. It's not about conquering others to your point of view, making money, religious, political authority, any of that. Pure devotees do not compete with the materialists because they are on the path back to Godhead where life is eternal and blissful. Such transcendentalists are non-envious and pure in heart. In the material world, everyone is envious of everyone else, and therefore there is competition. This is because we're talking about a world of limited resources. If one is invested in the limited resources, one has to have some stake in having friends and enemies. Friends are those who support your acquisition and maintaining your own resources. Enemies are your competition for those resources. Could be money, could be food, could be sex, could be pride, could be anything. Whatever the resource is, as long as you're fighting over it, you're still within the modes of nature. The impersonal aspect of the absolute truth is not the highest. Above the impersonal feature is the Paramatma feature, and above this is the personal feature of the absolute truth, or Bhagavan. Srimad Bhagavatam gives information about the absolute truth in his personal feature. It is higher than impersonalist literatures and higher than the Jnana-kanda divisions of the Vedas. It is even higher than the Karma-kanda division and even higher than the Upasana-kanda division because it recommends the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. In Karma-kanda, there is competition to reach heavenly planets for better sense gratification, and there is similar competition in the Jnana-kanda and Upasana-kanda. The Srimad Bhagavatam is superior to all of these because it aims at the supreme truth, which is the substance or the root of all categories. From Srimad Bhagavatam, one can come to know the substance as well as the categories. The substance is the absolute truth, the Supreme Lord, and all emanations are relative forms of energy. Nothing is apart from the substance, but at the same time, the energies are different from the substance. Right? Like I said earlier, like a sun ray and the sun itself. Mm-hmm. So the Bhagavatam first verse began with Janmati Yasya Tonvayad, which means Janmati Yasya, that which is the source of everything. Prabhupada is referring to this here. That source. This knowledge that the energy of the Lord is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord is an answer to the mental speculator's attempt to establish the energy as the absolute. Development of this transcendental consciousness grounded in the conception of simultaneously one and different leads one immediately to the stage of freedom from the threefold miseries. The threefold miseries are 1, those miseries which arise from the mind and body, 2, those miseries inflicted by other living beings, and 3, those miseries arising from natural catastrophes over which one has no control. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the surrender of the devotee unto the absolute person. The devotee is fully aware that they are one with the absolute at the same time in the eternal position of servant to the absolute. In the material conception, one falsely thinks himself the lord of all they survey, and therefore they are always troubled by the threefold miseries of life. Yeah, this idea of trying to control and enjoy independently is a source of one's own misery. But as soon as one comes to know their real position as a transcendental servant, they at once become free from all miseries. As long as the living entity is trying to master material nature, there is no possibility of their becoming servant of the Supreme. Service to the Lord is rendered in pure consciousness of one's spiritual identity. By service, one is immediately freed from material encumbrances. So Prabhupada is going to go and talk more about here how this Bhagavatam is a commentation on the Vedanta Sutra that Vyasadeva himself wrote. So this is his own commentary on it. It's an expansion of that Vedanta Sutra. The proper method for receiving this transcendental message is to hear it submissively. A challenging attitude cannot help one to really realize this transcendental message. One particular word is used herein for proper guidance. This word is shushrushu, which means to be anxious to hear this transcendental message. The desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification. Of note, to not have a challenging attitude doesn't mean you can't ask questions. The whole Bhagavatam is full of questions, just like the Bhagavad Gita. It means, for example, when Bhagavatam says that the absolute truth can be experienced in sound, instead of being like, well, why? How does that work? And trying to like figure it out, you know? If one tries to run the experiment instead, just like honestly tries to chant, that would be appropriate and would actually be fruitful. But to kind of like throw up intellectual abstract that's the challenging attitude Prabhupada is pointing out here, doesn't help. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. Unfortunate people find enough time to hear idle social and political conversations, but when invited to attend a meeting of devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they suddenly become reluctant. The intelligent person with thoughtful discretion can be assured by the great sage Vyasadeva that they can realize the Supreme Personality directly by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Without undergoing the different stages of realization set forth in the Vedas, one can be lifted immediately to the position of Paramahamsa, pure devotee, simply by agreeing to receive this message. Text 3. O expert and thoughtful persons, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desired tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. You know what? Let's pause. I've been speaking for like half an hour. What did we hear so far that stood out? What do you find interesting? Any questions? Nancy.
I just have a question. So my version, I have my first canto is in 2 books. I got them many years ago.
Okay.
I think they were published in 1970, and I find that my translations are different than what you're reading. And I seem to remember the first time I read this from Bhagavatam and Wisdom of the Sages back in 2020. I found that in the first canto, the first several verses, the translations were very different. Was that just based on somebody coming back and cleaning it up and further publication?
Likely, if you're reading from 1970, then it's probably before Prabhupada's. Like I've held and read original versions of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam that he printed in New Delhi, and
Well, I got this from India, so it may well my Srimad Bhagavatam stops at Canto 10, Chapter 13. It doesn't go any further, which I
Yeah.
found much to my dismay. So I'm gonna go find the 11th and 12th canto.
yeah, we'll hook you up. But
Yeah.
the editing under Prabhupada's direction, he actually asked it to be edited.
Okay, that was just a quick question about it. Yeah, thank you.
To be honest, I will say I've read both the edited and unedited versions of Prabhupada's books. Sometimes you find that there's like some prefer one or the other. I prefer the edited versions. I think they're a little cleaner. I think they're closer to what Prabhupada wanted. But I will say in content, they're not different. So
No, that's right. They're not. They're just really linguistically a little bit different. You know,
yeah,
the flavors there.
stylistically, yeah. But
The purports are the same.
yeah,
They didn't change the purports, but they did change some of the translations of the verses, which was interesting to me. Yeah.
thanks. Any other questions or reflections so far? It's a lot. This is a lot.
Jeff and Lauren, maybe.
Oh yeah, we had a couple questions.
Sure.
We haven't fully read the Bhagavad Gita, so maybe that's why we're a little lost in some parts. But I know you didn't cover this specifically, but I read it. Said that Krishna is the divine son of Devaki. So I'm wondering how he can be the son if Krishna is the absolute truth of the creator of all things.
Yeah.
How can he be the son? Yeah.
It's a good question. That's a contradiction that even his great devotee Kunti was remarking on the 8th chapter of this first canto. As the absolute truth, he doesn't have any father or mother. However, out of his own sweet will, he advanced. He appeared. Actually, historically speaking, Krishna appeared on the planet 5,000 years ago. So we see that he had a conversation with Arjuna, right? That's an actual conversation that happened at a place called Kurukshetra about 5,000 years ago. And as such, when he appeared, he had parents. So Devaki was his birth mother. He was also raised by a foster mother and father, Nanda, Yashoda and Nanda, respectively, in Vrindavan. So he has his pastimes, what's called in Sanskrit as lila. And this could be called like an avatara, an appearance of the Lord. Other avatars, so for example, like Lord Ramachandra, or there's a partial list of incarnations given in the 3rd chapter. We'll get to in a couple of weeks, but yeah, we're starting off before we even get into his appearance with the absolute truth. So from that perspective, it would be like, why would he have a mom? How does that work? Good question. Hope that helps.
That does help. And then another quick question. So what's Krishna's relationship to Brahma, not the Brahman that we've talked about, but Brahma? I'm forgetting which page we saw that on.
With an A at the end, Brahma?
Brahma, yeah.
Yeah. So Brahma is the first created living entity. And Brahma's
of Krishna, like that Krishna created.
Yeah, and
Okay.
as such, he's manifested in the material world, and he's inspired from within the heart to have whatever knowledge he needs to have for his own service. His service includes taking the raw substance of the universe and secondarily creating. It's already been provided for him. Just like we may, find rock and wood and so forth, they're all there. We can create things from it, but we didn't create the rock or the wood. He actually creates based on even larger scale ingredients and manifests planetary systems. He's a secondary creator. But even the verse mentions that Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye. In the heart, he was inspired by Krishna, by that absolute truth. How to have the potency, the knowledge to actually effect his service, which is to be a creator.
Okay.
Yeah, he's what's called a demigod.
And then one last really quick question, sorry.
Yeah.
So do all these deities have like a certain like energy to them? Like so they're all kind of expressions of the one, but like I guess how are they created and like do they have specific energies? Do we give them energies when we're devoted to them and really believe in I guess their qualities, what they represent, and we can kind of channel that and almost take that on?
It's a good question.
So there's a lot in that question.
So we can always do
It's a good question.
It is a good question.
I think maybe that's the kind of thing we could take offline.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's a great question, but it's also like there's a lot that I'd have to kind of break out. Like, what is a deity?
Mm-hmm.
How is it that there's a Lord, but there's also like these what I've called like demigods, right? Like Brahma or Shiva. What are they? And what is deity worship? And what is the process of like, what does it mean to like offer service to a deity? And what does that do for us? And then,
right. So I'm thinking if we created this, how can I serve something that we created? But then again, if it's an expression of the larger one.
Bona fide deity worship is not actually based on any creation. The forms that are given, they're actually defined. For example, forms of Krishna, they're defined in scripture. That's the difference between deity worship and idol worship. Idol worship is when someone creates something, some concept, and say like in the Old Testament, this is the idea of a golden calf, and someone's like, worshiping the golden calf and like trying to make money off of their so-called deity. And the Old Testament is like quite firm about like that's not good, because that was very, very common a couple thousand years ago in the Levant, in the Middle East and Near East, like there was a lot of idol worship. And that's a corruption of this principle of like actually faithfully receiving a description of the form of the Lord and worshiping it with faith. Instead of doing that, one can create their own thing. That's simply speculation. So you can't actually create a form. You can only reproduce what is already offered in this way. And there are certain rituals for what's called establishing a deity, asking to be present, and worshiping in a regulated way. So that's a little bit about that. So there is like a science behind it. It's not like a whimsical thing of like, well, whatever you feel like. You can just kind of like create a form. And does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. We could talk more.
Okay.
Great question.
Yeah,
I'd
great
just like to
questions.
say, is it okay if I speak for a second?
Absolutely.
I'd just like to say, first of all, welcome, Lauren and your friend there.
Yeah.
It's really nice to have new voices and, new curiosities and new questions, for those of us that have been doing this for a long time. It's really nice to have others coming into the group. And as I was listening to your questions and just looking over the notes that I wrote, it's just one of the lines jumped out. We can't know the absolute truth on our own.
Yeah.
Only if they reveal it to us, and then we still need to surrender. Right? I just thought that was really interesting in just terms of any of us, no matter how far along the path of trying to understand these texts that we're working through, we'll never understand it all on our own.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to continue for a little bit. I want to kind of summarize this third verse, and then I'll pause and we'll take any reflections on anything you heard for the day. We're not really going to get past the third verse, but that's okay. That was my plan because these are 3 very hefty verses with very hefty purports. And then next week we'll get into the actual 6 questions asked by the sages and the beginnings of their answers, which is the rest of the whole chapter. We might even get to the next chapter. Okay, so purport to verse 3.
Can you read verse 3?
We read the verse, now on the purport. The Vedas are compared to the desire tree because they contain all things knowable by man. They deal with mundane necessities as well as spiritual realization. The Vedas contain regulative principles of knowledge covering social, political, religious, economic, military, medicinal, chemical, physical, and metaphysical subject matters, and all that may be necessary to keep the body and soul together. Above and beyond all this are specific directions for spiritual realization. Every living entity, beginning from Brahma, the firstborn living entity within the material world, down to the insignificant ant, desires to relish some sort of taste derived from sense perceptions. These sensual pleasures are technically called rasas. Such rasas are of different varieties. In the revealed scriptures, the following 12 varieties of rasas are enumerated. I'll give the English: anger, wonder, conjugal love, comedy, chivalry, mercy, servitorship, fraternity or friendship, horror, shock, neutrality, and parenthood. The sum total of all these rasas is called affection or love. Primarily, such signs of love are manifested in adoration, service, friendship, parental affection, and conjugal love. As far as the spirit souls are concerned, they are one qualitatively with the Supreme Lord. Therefore, the rasas were originally exchanged between the spiritual living being and the spiritual whole, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual exchange, or rasa, is fully exhibited in spiritual existence between living entities and the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is therefore described as the fountainhead of all rasas. When one associates with the Supreme Lord and exchanges one's constitutional rasa with the Lord, then the living being is actually happy. In the liberated condition only, this primary rasa is experienced in full. In material existence, the rasa is experienced in the perverted form, which is temporary. And thus, the rasas of the material world are exhibited in the material form of raudra, anger, and so on. Therefore, one who attains full knowledge of these different rasas, which are the basic principles of activities, can understand the false representations of the original rasas, which are reflected in the material world. The learned scholar seeks to relish the real rasa in the spiritual form. In this verse, it is definitely stated that spiritual rasa, which is relished even in the liberated stage, can be experienced in the literature of the Srimad Bhagavatam due to its being the ripened fruit of all Vedic knowledge. By submissively hearing this transcendental literature, one can attain the full pleasure of their heart's desire. But one must be very careful to hear the message from the right source. Srimad Bhagavatam is exactly received from the right source. It was brought by Narada Muni from the spiritual world and given to his disciple Sri Vyasadeva. The latter in turn delivered the message to his son, Srila Shukadeva Goswami, and Shukadeva Goswami delivered it to Maharaj Parikshit just 7 days before the king's death. Shukadeva Goswami was a liberated soul from his very birth. He was liberated even in the womb of his mother, and he did not undergo any sort of spiritual training after his birth. At birth, no one is qualified, neither in the mundane nor the spiritual sense, but Sri Shukadeva Goswami, due to his being a perfectly liberated soul, did not have to undergo an evolutionary process for spiritual realization. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are narrated, and the narration is systematically depicted by Shukadeva Goswami. Thus, the whole subject matter is appealing to all classes of persons, including those who seek liberation and those who seek to become one with the Supreme Whole. One should conclude, therefore, that the serious student of the rasas should receive the message of Bhagavatam in the chain of disciplic succession. Disciplic succession means the chain of teacher and students. One teacher teaches a student who teaches another student. The disciplic succession from Srila Shukadeva Goswami, who describes the Bhagavatam from its very beginning, and not whimsically to satisfy the mundaner who has very little knowledge in transcendental science. Srimad Bhagavatam is so carefully presented that a sincere and serious person can at once enjoy the ripened fruit of Vedic knowledge simply by drinking the nectarian juice through the mouth of Shukadeva Goswami or his bona fide representative. Okay. So, the Bhagavatam continues. Once in a holy place in the forest of Naimisharanya, great sages headed by the sage Shaunaka assembled to perform a great 1,000-year sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Lord and his devotees. It's a long sacrifice. It's like, imagine like different conferences you can go to. What's the different themes? The theme of this conference is how can you do the greatest good for humanity at large? And it lasted 1,000 years. One day after finishing their morning duties by burning a sacrificial fire and offering a seat of esteem to Sutta Goswami, the great sages made inquiries with great respects about the following matters. We'll pause there. All right. We'll get into the actual matters, the questions they asked next week. So what did you hear? What reflections do you have? Or any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
So this Srimad Bhagavatam was written after the Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago?
The Bhagavatam was written after the Bhagavad Gita. So yes. Now, because the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata,
Okay.
and as we heard, Vyasadeva had already composed the Mahabharata and was dissatisfied. Therefore, he I would say manifested Bhagavatam. The thing about the Bhagavatam, though, that's interesting, and that makes chronology difficult,
Okay.
is that it doesn't have an origin that can be pointed to say it was only spoken here. The Bhagavatam itself is presented that we're getting from Vyasadeva is about 5,000 years old. It's just after the Bhagavad Gita, he spoke this Bhagavatam. The events leading up to that are described in the 4th and 5th chapters I mentioned. He was feeling dissatisfied. He didn't know why. His guru came, Narada Muni. He took shelter of his guru and said, what is happening with me? I've done all this service. I should be happy. I should be satisfied. I'm not. Narada said, you've not sufficiently described the personality of Godhead directly. You should do that. So he went into meditation. Vyasadeva did. And in meditation at his ashram, he spoke the verses of Bhagavatam. But it's to be understood that the verses of Bhagavatam were not created by him. It's an eternal sound vibration. It's describing activities that happened previously in other ages. in other universes even. Activities that include activities in the spiritual world. Some of those are based on conversations that took place at historical times. Some of those conversations were not 5,000 years ago. They were many, many, many millions of years ago or in other places. So to piece together the chronology of Bhagavatam, it depends on what you're actually asking about, like what section. Some you can actually say this happened this at this point. Like these first few verses, the sages of Naimisharanya, that's 5,000 years ago. We can say that for sure. Other parts of it, not necessarily. So that's a little bit of a preface to kind of answering the question you're coming up with, but you wanted to say more, I think?
Well, I'm just trying to, like, in my mind, figure out how this all came about. I mean, what, after the Bhagavad Gita, Vasudev, who was Krishna's father, right,
Vasudev, yes.
wrote the,
Oh, sorry, you're making a little mistake. There's Vasudev is Krishna. Vasudev is Krishna's father. Vyasadeva is a different.
Vyasadeva.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine.
Vasudev
All
is
right,
the
that's
father of the
what's,
Vedas. Yeah.
maybe that'll help. Okay,
Yeah, he's a different person.
all right.
Can you pass in the Bhagavatam? There's a picture of him. Vyasadeva compiled all the Vedas. Here he is. The one with the saffron robes is his spiritual teacher, Narada Muni.
Okay.
The one with the bluish skin or darkish skin, that's Vyasadeva, who's what's called a Shaktivesh avatar. He's an empowered incarnation of Krishna. He's a living entity, but he was empowered to present the scripture. So that's what he did, including the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam came to him in meditation in his ashram. That's described in the early 7th chapter of this canto. We'll get to that.
What's the name?
Okay.
What's the name of the ashram? The name of the ashram is Shamya Pras.
That's Shamya's name.
Nice. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question. Where are the purports?
Report?
Where you're reading from?
Oh, on the online version, you may have to actually click
Oh.
chapter 1.
Okay. Yeah, depending on so what you do is you go to Canto 1, and when you click on Canto 1, go to chapter 1, questions
Yeah.
of the sages. Now, depending on how it comes up for me, it just shows the verses. You can click on text 1, and it'll have the whole breakdown of the entire verse with the Sanskrit, the word for word of the Sanskrit, the translation of the verse, and the purport. The other thing you can do is with just the chapter 1 there, you can go to advanced view. And under advanced view, you can click and unclick different things. So you can like have the Devanagari, the Sanskrit script, on or off. You can have the purport on or off.
I see.
So that way you can have the purports for the whole chapter on one screen. You can read that in one go without ever changing windows. So that's what I would do. I'll go to advanced view or click on the text number.
Yeah, I did the text number and I see the purports now. Now, because I'm like, I don't know where he is.
Yeah, it's technology.
Okay.
We're bringing you your book next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, more reflections. We have a few minutes still. This is a lot. It starts very abstract before it gets concrete and more easy to flow with. So don't feel bad if you're like, what? A little bit.
I'm a little bit like that. What?
Yeah, that's okay. It's all right.
Oh boy.
It'll get more concrete next week because it's like, okay, they asked 6 questions, and then here's some of the answers, and here's how the thing starts to flow, and it'll actually start to like coalesce. Don't worry. But let's take more reflections, comments, or questions before we end.
Okay, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you like the personality of Godhead, the supreme personality of Godhead, the absolute Godhead, are those all just synonymous with Krishna?
Basically, yeah. So one little wrinkle there is that the absolute truth, Krishna, he manifests in different incarnations. So they're all what could be considered personalities of Godhead. So they're non-different from each other. They're the same supreme person with different moods, different time, place, and circumstance. Will have different activities. For example, Ramachandra or Lord Rama, very popular avatar, with his devotee Hanuman, and his wife Sita. Ramachandra has a number of pastimes that are described primarily in a book called the Ramayana, which is like itself quite a large book. He is a personality of Godhead. Krishna is expressed to be the supreme personality of Godhead. He's the source from which all other avatars emanate or are expanded from. That science of how there's like avatars or avatars of avatars is more systematically described a couple chapters from now. So that's a distinction between personality and supreme personality. But basically, yes, they're all the same person. They're not different people.
Okay,
Same
thank you.
supreme person. Good question. I just met Lauren, Jack, and Kristen like 3 days ago,
Saturday.
which was awesome.
I have another question.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you talked about 5 somethings. Soul.
Yeah. The 5 topics of Bhagavad Gita
That's what I was.
are elaborated on the Bhagavatam: the soul,
Yep.
God, time, the material world, and karma.
Okay. And they're the 5
Topic
topics of the. Okay.
of the Bhagavad Gita. And
Okay.
so, like, if we know that all those things are what's up, then the Bhagavatam is like, okay, so then how do they interact? Those are the questions that are answered in the Bhagavatam. Especially, how does the soul and the Lord, what is their relationship? That's really what's the main focus is.
Okay. And the Srimad Bhagavatam came after the Bhagavad Gita.
That's right. It's the postgraduate study. You're all taking a master's in spiritual science here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
I was just going to comment that these purports for the first 3 verses are among the longest.
Yes, they're
Yes.
they're not usually this long.
So it was a little difficult to follow where you were
Mhm.
jumping to because you did a great job with that. But if we have really long purports, you could say skipping ahead, something just like that because I was like flipping through trying to find it, but that might help us to find where you're speaking from.
Yeah, I'm reading ahead as while I'm speaking because I'm trying to thread it together.
No, you
So
did a great job. You did a really great job. So
yeah, so I'll say, like, for those reading online, try to, depending on how much time you have, there's a few options. At least read the first 3 verses, which is a couple paragraphs. If you have more time than that, and you should, try to read as much as you can from the purports of those first 3 verses. That comes to about 11 pages, 6 pages, 3 and 3, or 13 or 15 pages, 15 pages. So about 15 pages of reading is the verses and purports of those first 3 verses. If you have more time than that, you can read ahead. Look at the rest of the verses for the chapter, because we're going to get to that next week. What the 6 questions are by the sages, what their answers, at least the beginnings of the answers. And if you're really excited, you can read the whole introduction and read about Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. That's also available as a standalone anytime you want to. Just go there and learn about Lord Chaitanya. Just like dip into that. It's really sweet, his life. Somehow or other, we're at time.
We are.
Okay, we'll pause here. What an auspicious beginning. We had like 15 people join live, including some bright new faces. And we'll see you in the WhatsApp group. Please comment, add a comment in the WhatsApp group. Anything that stood out from these readings, what you heard, or what you're going to get from your readings. We use the WhatsApp thread to reflect and comment so that we can all just kind of like churn that nectar. Because what seems like maybe, in your own head, you're like, well, that's pretty obvious. Other people won't find it obvious. They'll find it really beautiful. And the reflections we all share are like really one of the best parts of these group study experiences. So we'll see you in WhatsApp, and we'll see you next week.
How's Kristen doing?
Yeah, Kishore is asking, how's Kristen doing? How you doing? You've been quiet, but smiling.
Yeah.
I'm doing well. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, but I'm excited.
Great.
Yeah.
Doing great. It is a lot. It very quickly, as early as next week, it is going to start to become more manageable. Hare Krishna. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, YouTube crew. See you on WhatsApp. See you next week. Haribol.
Yeah, don't get discouraged, anybody that's new.
Yeah.
It does all of a sudden will sink in.
Well,
Thank
more than
you.
any other book, the very beginning of the first canto is such a big picture thing. It's like, what? So it'll zoom back into a person talking to another person very quickly. But yeah, you're not alone in feeling your mind is blown a little bit. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
Hare
everyone.